I just want you to know I'm trying so hard to do a bad job and like make uneven walls. that's pretty even though, actually. Hello, you dirty potters. How are you today? In today's video, I'm going to show you how to fix the wobble. The wobble is something that happens to a lot of my students who are going from beginner to intermediate. And when I teach my intermediate class, I still have some students who have that little wobble at the top and they wonder how it forms. In today's video, not only am I going to show you why this forms, I'm going to show you how to avoid it, and I'm going to show you how to fix it. Now, before we start this video, I do want to say there are some skills you're going to need to not only understand, but to fix this issue. I heavily suggest before you start this video, especially if you're a beginner going into intermediate, you learn how to cone your clay up and down. A lot of people in the wood throwing world seem to think that just wedging your clay is enough to make this wobble go away, but that's only half of the story. I heavily suggest you learn how to cone your stuff up and down before throwing, and I have already made a video on that. I will post it down below for you because it is a skill that you will need to make your clay extra even and homogenized, which is something that makes this wobble go away. With that video under tow, let's talk about why this wobble manifests and how to get rid of it. Do you see this piece of clay right here? Yeah, you do. This is unwedged clay fresh out of my porcelain bag. None of the clay is even whatsoever. We're gonna center this and start pulling it off rip. As I said before, the reason that this wobble manifests is because of uneven clay. And from here, you wouldn't be faulted for thinking that this is even clay. You wouldn't even be faulted as a beginner for thinking that the act of centering clay makes it even, but that's not true. Although I have centered my clay body, the internals of the clay are not homogenized. They're not as even as they can possibly get all throughout, which means any little lumps of clay or any unevenness in clay, if there's a hard piece, even fresh out of the bag like this clay was here, can still have uneven points, which means that if I open up my clay and I start pulling, no matter how good I am personally at pulling, the clay wasn't ready to be pulled because it's not as even as it was all throughout. Now, of course, we all know this trick where you can cut off the topmost portion of the clay body and you can continue to pull. But as you're most likely saying to yourself right now, Dante, if the clay is uneven on the inside, on the internals of the clay, doesn't that mean no matter how well you pull, that wobble is going to manifest again? Yes, that is what it means. No matter how well I pull, there's going to be a spot in the clay body that's uneven. Which technically means this wobble is going to manifest no matter how many times I cut my top off, until I reach the point where it's the least amount of uneven, and then you might have a lesser wobble like I have here. But this wobble is going to happen no matter what, as long as you do not homogenize your clay. I just want you to know I'm trying so hard to do a bad job and like make uneven walls. that's pretty even though, actually. Well, of course you got a wobble, Dante. You didn't wedge your clay. Wedging is the thing that makes it homogenized. That's the thing that gets the air bubbles out and makes sure that the clay is as even as it can be before you throw. That's not entirely true. Let me show you what it looks like when I do wedge my clay and then I throw in the same fashion I did now. I sped that part of the footage up for you, but I did wedge over 80 times there. Let's take this nice rounded wedged ball of clay, put it on the wheel, and do exactly what we did beforehand. As the potter, after a while, you'll be able to tell how even the clay is from the inside out. But just like the last time, this looks relatively centered, but we do have to figure out if this is centered by pulling it because we'll be able to tell from the inside out whether we manifest that little lump or not. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, this does feel a little bit more homogenized. This feels a little bit the same all throughout, more so than the last piece did anyway. But what happens when I pull this up? It still seems like this wobble is still there. And again, just like the last time, even if I cut the topmost part of this off, trust and believe that even though you manage to make it look even by cutting off a part of this, on your second and or third pull, you're most likely going to notice a slight wobble come back. Because in truth, there's an internal part of this clay that is uneven with the entirety of the clay body. Okay, Dante, well, it seems like I have to wedge, but you're telling me even if I do wedge, it makes it better, but it still doesn't make the wobble go away. So how do I homogenize my clay enough to where the wobble is reduced or at least just goes away? So how do I prepare my clay for the wheel in a way that will either get rid of or at least reduce the wobble massively? In truth, the thing that will get rid of that wobble is making your clay as even as it possibly can all throughout. As I keep saying, homogenizing the clay as best you can before you actively work with it. That means wedging the clay, and it also means oh, it makes sense why he said I have to watch this video before watch. It makes sense now. Now, I'm gonna be as truthful as I can with you. Coning up and down is kind of like wedging on the wheel in that the primary job of wedging is essentially to homogenize the clay body or make it as even as it can be all throughout before it gets on the wheel. Some people say it's to condense the clay platelets, some people say it's to get air bubbles out. It technically does those two things, but for most people, the primary job of not only coning up and down, but wedging before you get on the wheel is to make sure you have a much better experience in throwing before you actively throw by making the clay body even all throughout. If you can do these two things properly, if you can wedge properly and you can cone up and down properly, you will gain one extra perceptive skill and you will also have a much easier time throwing your clay, just in general. Trust me, it sounds crazy. It does sound like I'm telling you to do more work to do the thing that already costs work, but I promise you it'll be easier. When coning up and down, what you're doing is you're stretching out the clay body by bringing everything internally up into this pillar, into this cone. By bringing everything up, you're bringing the inner parts of the clay all the way up so that way you can touch them, rehomogenizing them and condensing them into one solid homogenized ball. I know I keep using the word homogenized a lot, but it truly does just mean to make something at least the same all throughout or to try and get it as close to possible. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna cone this up and down, and as you do this, you're going to feel a massive difference in how even your clay is. You're gonna see this happen where you get a little wobble at the top. You're most likely gonna cone up, and if you do it well, you'll cone up correctly. When you cone back down, you're gonna condense that wobble. You're gonna feel it go away because that was part of the uneven part of your clay. You're gonna come back up, and as you do, you're gonna notice that wobble is massively reduced. You have just condensed the part of the clay that was uneven back into itself, making it a little more even all throughout the clay. This, in turn, not only gives you a much easier and better feeling experience on the wheel, but it also gets rid of that wobble. Trust me when I say the main reason why this wobble manifests while you're throwing your clay is because you have some part of your clay body that is uneven. Regardless of how good you are at pulling, this wobble will come out if your clay is not at least a little bit more even all throughout or homogenized than it truly came out of the bag. Now we're essentially at the end of this lesson. If you're wondering how to cone up and down properly without making that big mushroom shape when people like karate chop it down, you should most likely watch my video. Again, I will link it down below. And before we leave, I do want to be transparent about something. You're going to meet someone one day who will tell you you don't need to wedge fresh out of the bag, mainly because the company has already done all of the de-airing and pugging and condensing of the clay body before it gets to you. And I'm a proponent of clay has memory, and what you're doing is you're trying to reset that memory when you wedge, but those people are technically right. Technically speaking, you do not need to wedge your clay ram's head style or twist style straight out of the bag. But keep in mind, those same people will get on the wheel and cone their clay up and down just like I've shown you in today's video. And that is essentially wedging on the wheel. Oh, but Dante, you don't need to wedge it. The company does all the wedging for you. And then I'll see them just yoke one up and down on the wheel. And I'm like, my brother in Christ, you're just doing it on a wheel instead of on the wedging table. You are doing the very thing you told me not to do. You're just doing it with equipment. Both techniques are valid. I'm a proponent of wedging off the wheel and then wedging my clay on the wheel for obvious reasons. I do not have a wobble. The way I do stuff is and has been working for quite some time. I don't have a wobble anymore because I understand what makes the wobble. It's internally uneven and unhomogenized clay. That is truly the way you stay away from the wobble. Well, thank you, Dirty Potters, for joining me today. You know, I couldn't really figure out whether to put this in the beginner or the intermediate playlist because I do have a beginner playlist that goes over wedging and things of that nature, and my coning up and down video is for intermediates. But that's only because most teachers that I see teach people how to wedge, center, open, and then pull a cylinder, and then they cone up and down. I teach my students how to cone up and down before they know how to center, because I know that if you can cone up and down properly, your clay will automatically center for you. We just skip an entire 4 lessons and include all of those lessons in the one thing that you were going to get to in the first place. And I do truly think that coning up and down on the wheel before you open and throw will save you a lot of heartache, it'll give you a much better throwing experience, and it'll get rid of that wobble. Remember to click all those YouTube buttons. Promise me in the comments below that when you cone up, you won't be weird about how it looks, and I will see you, Dirty Potters, next week.
Thank you for your patronage.
Hold on, I'm gonna give one of these. It never gets old.